Now, I will have the pleasure to introduce you Professor Mohammad Ershadul Karim from the University of Malaya. He's an expert on nanotechnologies regulation. He has published quite a lot about it already, especially on the regulatory aspects. Now, I give you the floor, Ershadul.
Thank you so much, Anthony, for all these kind words. It is really a pleasure, and I'm really honored, glad to be here today. I would say that this is a program, this is a workshop for which I have been waiting for years. I did my PhD on nanotechnologies, law and policy, and I started this at a time when in many parts of the world, especially in Europe and Australia, and New Zealand, Canada, USA, these countries, they have already evaluated their legal system, and all these fantastic report came out where they evaluated their legal system to see whether the existing legal framework is sufficient or adequate to meet the challenges of the prospective challenges or the theoretical challenges of nanomaterials on the human health and the environment. In that context, I got the opportunity to evaluate Malaysia's position. Malaysia is a wonderful country, and Malaysia's strength in electronics sector, Malaysia's strength in chemical sector. These are the things, we decided, these are the things inspired me to take this as my PhD project. And so when I did my PhD, during my PhD time, and even after 5 years of my PhD, I finished my PhD in 2015, and until now, I have been looking for such a legal workshop, something like this. I was fortunate that I got the opportunity to attend a number of workshops, which were mostly technical. And in all those workshops, I had actually nothing to do, just sitting, listening, and because all the people, it may be due to the fact that most of the invited participants, they are from science background or technical people. And also it can be happen that not many law background people, they studied this area. So with that experience, I tried to write something on this area, and all my research are focusing on how the law or our understanding of law, how this can be used to tackle or address some of the possible challenges we see in scientific publications where the researchers claim that these nanomaterials, once they come to close contact with the human being or in the environment, how they can, what are the different challenges that may raise, and how the existing legal system can address them. So with that brief background, I would like to thank Anthony for this invitation. I really feel honored, and I'm glad I'm here. And I would like to share some of my research findings with regard to what different Asian jurisdictions, different Asian countries they have been doing in terms of regulation of these nanomaterials. If I proceed, this is my presentation background. I would like to just highlight Asia in brief, then who are Asian major nano players, nano-related legal and regulatory framework in selected Asian jurisdictions, safety by design and overview, safety by design in Asian context, some legal and regulatory challenges, and recent developments. Let me share with you before I start my presentation that what I'll be presenting here today are based on my desk-based research. I did not get the opportunity to interview people who from other jurisdictions. So I'm very fortunate that I'm based in Malaysia for the last 10 years, but I'm originally from Bangladesh, and Bangladesh is in between India and China. So I see some of the, and then Japan and South Korea, they are our important development partners of Bangladesh. And also we have some very good diplomatic relations with the Central Asian countries or Western Asian countries. So with these, my background, I think I have a basic understanding, or I would say a good understanding about Asian culture, society, how laws are developed, and then how people react to different developments in other fields also. So while I did my research, or I have been doing my research in the last 10 years, I found that language is a serious issue, important limitation for researchers like us. Like in countries, Japan or Korea or China, or even in Thailand here, or if we see those Central Asian countries, I mean, every single country, they have different language, and these language, maybe they have some legal documents or policy materials available in the national language, but I try to focus on, or whatever my research that is developed based on the literature available in English only. So for your understanding, this is an Asia. This is the political map of Asia. Asia is broadly divided into 5 zones, I would say. The first one is Western Asia. And in Western Asia, we have important nano players like Turkey, like Iran. Then in Central Asia, sorry to say, we don't have much information about Central Asia, except Kyrgyzstan. Recently, I think they organized a session on nano safety with European Union that is available in the literature. Next is South Asia, from where I'm coming, and India is a big player, and India has some interesting developments. And then we have East Asia, China, Korea, then we have Japan. We have Southeast Asia, Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand, they're important players. So we have Central Asia, Western Asia, South Asia, East Asia, and Southeast Asia. These are the 5 important Asian zones. And these are important for one understanding that every single part, they have a different I would say trait or feature in terms of nanotechnologies regulations, and their approach is different in terms of commercialization or in terms of technology adoption. Their interest is different. So as you can see, Asia is the largest and the most populous continent on the earth. Asian countries are diversified in many sense. Like we have first world country, we have a second world country, and most of the countries are in so-called third world countries. Then we have these developed countries, we are developing countries. Now, Asia is known for some of the major historical civilizations, and you will hardly find any literature on nanomaterials or nanotechnologies where the history is discussed, and some of the Asian references are not there. Intentionally or unintentionally, knowingly, unknowingly, you may not realize, but the fact is, like you will read something about this Liker gas of China, then Fangzhou, where ancient time, Chinese people used to collect water from the air. Then in the Indian history, Indian civilization will come to know that Indian women used to use a cosmetic, they call it kajal, which they used to make their eyes beautiful. Then Damascus steel. In India also there was use of steel. In China, paint. In paint, people used to use nanomaterials. In Egypt, they used nanomaterials. So the message here is, it is clear that people of this part used to know the technique to utilize nanomaterials or materials in its nano form in their household utensils, cosmetics, medicine, and weapons. However, before we comment or before we discuss about how Asia regulates nanomaterials, it will be important to understand that in any legal system, the culture or political factors play, historical or socio-economic position of the country plays important role in understanding their legal and regulatory developments. We need to remember another thing is that there is no international regional organization in Asia like European Union or African Unity or Organization of American States. We do not have any kind of these organizations. What we have is something called ASEAN and SAARC. And SAARC is almost a dead organization, which is South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation. I'm sorry to say, mean the word dead, use the word dead, but the fact is for last a couple of years, there is almost no activity of this organization. Then ASEAN is important in terms of understanding the regulation of nanomaterials, because these organizations, with its limited capacity, I would say their mandate has been doing fantastic. So far, whatever development we see as an organization or as a region level, it is ASEAN. And in many Asian countries, the democracy is flawed. And why this is important, because why we need to understand the issue of democracy here, or government system here, because democracy, as we understand theoretically, ensures the accountability, transparency, corruption. I mean, you can ensure the management of budget, all these things. And what we see from European practice is that because of strong democracy, whatever initiative the regulators or the policymakers take, people, they do have at least some idea. But in Asian context, except for some countries like Japan, to some extent, Singapore, South Korea, most of the time, the general people, they do not have any idea how decisions are taken and how budget is allocated, how budget is spent. And another issue is that participatory rule making or public participation in the lawmaking is not still widely practiced in most of the Asian jurisdictions. Like, we do not have any convention like Aarhus Convention on public participation. So our regulators, or in this part of the world, regulators, they take their decisions, and people, they simply need to accept it. Another reason may be because of our Asian culture, give our rule-making power or authority to, I mean, where the collective good is respected over individual benefits. That may be another reason why these things is happening in Asia. So if you see the democracy index issued by the Economist Intelligence, if you see this, most of the Asian countries in the category of flawed democracy or very close to authoritarian government. That is the reflection. These feature in Asian countries, I think, is very important to understand the lawmaking or the legal and regulatory developments of nanomaterials. This is almost the same scenario. The previous one was of 2018. This one is 2019. And as you can see, most of we do not have any green color. We have flawed democracy, then hybrid regime, and authoritarian regime. Before I start, before I focus on the legal issues, it is better to have an understanding of our legal system also. In some of the countries, we have a civil law legal system. Some countries follow common law legal system. We have Muslim law legal system and mixed law legal system. Now, why this understanding is important is because in civil law jurisdiction, as we understand, most of the legal provisions are codified. On the other hand, in common law legal system, there are scopes for interpretation in judicial lawmaking. That's why some of the developments we see in countries like Korea, Japan, China, Iran, some of the they are civil law legal system, and that's why whatever policy documents we see are available, I have a feeling that that is because of that legal system. I mean, the legal system influenced them to do that. On the other hand, in common law legal system, the important agent here is like India. There are a lot of developments. In the next few slides, I will show you that India's contribution in terms of nanotechnology developments or nanomaterials development, that's huge. But unfortunately, we do not see many policy documents in Indian context. So here is rule of law index. Once again, why I have included this is because as we anticipate that now most of the nanomaterial, nano-enhanced product will be in the market, and in existing literature, there are anticipation that the tort law will play a leading role. The judges, they need to play their role. These rule of law, or how the courts interpret different or how people get justice, this understanding is important. To my, in my opinion, that if we understand these also, so you will see that it is the legal system, it is the economic or financial strength of the country. These are all interrelated. Now, let us see who are the major nano players in the Asian context. So when USA started the formal movement in 2003 with the enactment of the 21st Century Nanotechnology Research and Development Act, some of the Asian countries started immediately. It's like Japan or South Korea. These countries, China, Iran, all of these countries started almost immediately. Now, in South Korea, they have enacted a law also. In 2003, they have enacted a law, and the law is more or less something similar like the USA law. The law was enacted to set up the administrative bodies. Now, the first graph here, you can see the national priority, ratio of shares of articles published in the Web of Science. The total number of articles they publish, and if they make the ratio of articles published in nanomaterials, then the number is like this. So another point here is the countries are trying, and their priorities are shifting very frequently. So maybe in 1 year, it is not very consistent. The next table or graph is on number of nanoarticles per GDP. Every billion, for every billion, how many articles they have published. And from here, you will see that Iran, South Korea, Singapore, China, India, Pakistan, Malaysia, Singapore, these are some of the countries, Taiwan, Thailand, Japan is a very important player with regard to nanomaterials in Asian context. Now, if we look at the next slide, that is on patent. That is on nanotechnology patent, European Patent Office or US Patent Office, the number of patent these countries have registered. And this also indicates, if you if you consider the seriousness in this area, these are some of the reflections also. So I have shared these graphs only, or these tables only, to show you that these are some of the countries which are major nano players in Asian context. We have many other countries like Sri Lanka. They have a program. Like in my country, we have some program. In Bangladesh, we have some program. Even Nepal, Bhutan, they have taken also they have taken initiatives to utilize nanomaterials to solve some of their problems. But that is still not, in that stage comparing to these few countries. What are the legal and regulatory developments? We understand that at the international level, at least in the European context or Australian context, there are 4 popular mode of regulation, starting with the self-regulation, industry self-regulation, command and control regulation. So of these regulation, we'll try to see what Asia is trying to do, or what Asia has been doing. As I already mentioned, that with the USA and European leaders, Asian countries joined the race almost immediately. Initially, some of the Asian countries, they used to share the allocation of the budget, how much they have allocated. But later on, this trend we do not see. Another, besides, there are some factors which are responsible in the development of regulation in Asian context, and some of these factors are, so number 1 is commercialization. That is, Asian countries were influenced or inspired from USA or European developments, or Australian, New Zealand developments. Besides, there are reasons of this legal and political system. As I was mentioning, the civil law legal system played an important role. And to me, the most important reason was this one, the membership in the leading international organization. That is, some of these Asian countries, especially Japan and South Korea, they are members of OECD. And because OECD has been playing central or crucial role in the regulation of nanomaterials all over the world, as an international organization. And these 2 countries, because they're part of that organization, that is my understanding, that because of that, these countries, they had to do all these developments in their national context also. And And other countries, like the documents we see, like China, Iran, they have their civil or legal system. So some of the policy documents we see that is to be codified, or that is to be published. That is how they regulate. The next one is in ASEAN countries. They have been playing recently, starting from 2014. We see a recent trend that some of the ASEAN countries, they are playing important role, and they are trying to utilize the expertise of OECD, and these are the countries they time to time arrange some seminars or workshop conferences, and this is how ASEAN as a region is coming up as an important player. Here within the ASEAN region, if you know that Singapore and Malaysia, mostly they bring the technology from the USA, and that's how Singapore and Malaysia constituted an important nano district. But Thailand, in recent times, it seems that Thailand is coming very strongly as an important player in terms of nanomaterials, utilizing nanomaterials. Now, in terms of regulation, this is what I was mentioning in the very beginning. What other countries did almost immediately, that once they started the process, they evaluated their legal system. We do not see this trend in Asian context. What we saw is that Japan is the only exceptional country, that Japan did one sectoral review of their environmental law, if I'm not mistaken here. And this part of the world, nano safety has never been a serious issue. In terms of budget allocation, literature suggests that the budget is only 1 to 2%. As you know, that these Asian countries, we have many development challenges and research and developments. The budget in research and developments is allocated very few. Very small amount of budget Asian countries allocate, and there nano safety is even, a small amount of budget is allocated for nano safeties. So countries around Asian countries have been dealing with nano safety matters through some policy documents, and these policy documents all are soft law instruments. And from law, because we are, if you see it from the enforceability of the soft instruments, these are in most of the cases, these are not enforceable. So these Asian countries adopted guidelines, they adopted plan strategies. In when you go to the court of law with this one, the court of law normally declares that these are administrative plans, and unless and until these are in conflict with the constitutional provisions, so this cannot be, you cannot stop it. You cannot raise any question. We have discussed about budget, even though limited budget is allocated, but countries like China, Japan, South Korea, because China and Japan are, because Japan and South Korea are already members of this OECD, and these countries have been playing important role. Even these countries sponsored some of the programs of OECD, when OECD took the initiative to evaluate engineered nanomaterials, 13 engineered nanomaterials. China, Japan, Korea, they were the lead sponsors. Besides Asian countries, they have adopted a number of voluntary guidelines. Even in Japan also, the guidelines are voluntary in nature. What Asian countries did, some of the Asian countries come up with some standards, safety standards, or different types of standards. And these standards are followed using the standard of ISO or IEC. And these are the list of some of these standards these countries have adopted. Because of a language issue, I could not check what is the status of these standards, but the fact here is most of these standards are voluntary in nature. And it is clearly stated that this is for the purpose of guidelines only. So, but in civil law jurisdiction like China, it is found that some of their guidelines are mandatory, but this is not the case of, and those guidelines are relating to electronic products. They are relating to, mostly electronic products. These are by mandatory. Another interesting thing some of the Asian countries did is that they have introduced the system of certification. As you can see, we have Iran, we have Taiwan, we have Malaysia, and we have Thailand. These system of certification they have introduced. And this is, when European countries or even USA, they introduce the product register system, like in Denmark, or we see this emerging project on emerging nanotechnology span. They have tried to develop nano product registers. These Asian countries, to me, it is interesting also that in order to harness the commercial prospect of nanomaterials, these countries, they come up with this certification. This is like ISO certification. Now, the interesting thing here is, or the thing which is of concern for me as a lawyer or researcher, is that nobody actually knows that these regulators, they are giving this certification, and then what will happen later on if it is found that that particular product release nanomaterials and that is injurious to human health, then what will happen? The practice is that it is difficult to make the regulators reliable. And if the case is even in developed countries, that it is difficult to make the regulators liable. And in Asian jurisdiction, in Asian context, this will be even, I mean, to some extent, it will be impossible. So these area, I mean, we need to do some research to understand this. In my personal meeting, I tried to ask this question several times, but I mean, frankly speaking, I did not get any right answer. Who will take the responsibility? Now, safety by design, we mean safety by design as, I mean, if we take the life cycle of nanomaterials from cradle to grave life cycle, product life cycle, it means that to integrate the knowledge of potential adverse effect of nanomaterials in the process of designing, production, and use on human health, animals, and the environment. Now, for designing, I understand that designing may be, this is so technical, and it may be same in the context of all jurisdiction. But in terms of production and in terms of use, these are the two phases or stages. I, as a researcher or lawyer, I should be really concerned about this, because the production stage, I mean, when the issue of occupational health and safety is a concern, whether Asian jurisdictions, they follow these standards properly, and then when these products will come into the market, what will be the consequences? These are the two things. I mean, we really do not have a clear idea or picture about how these two stages, what will happen during this time. And also, if we take Europe as an example, we see that the biocides, cosmetics, medical devices, these things are strictly regulated. But in Asian context, because we do not have any international organization, so these things, from my experience, what I have seen, that the countries that do it, just, I mean, what should I say? I mean, these countries, they feel that they should come up with some regulation on this area, they try to do it. Now, while the idea of these safety by design is great, as I was telling you, production stage, use stage, during these two stages, Asian countries will be struggling, that I can foresee, because of the economic capabilities, then the less priority issues, we have cultural and political factors involved, budget allocation, due to these reasons. If you take the product life cycle, then Asian countries, most of the Asian countries, they have general legal provisions. That general legal provisions comes from, I mean, starting from the constitutional provision, which provides right to life, right to environment. These provisions are very common in Asian jurisdictions. Then there are general provisions on chemical, environment, occupational health, safety, product liability, consumer protection. These things are general in most of the Asian jurisdictions. You can find it. Tort law principles are also there. Seldom, sometimes they are implemented. They are used by the court. The courts respect the tort law principles. Sometimes very isolated. Except for South Korea, which has enacted an administrative law, as I was mentioning in the beginning, there is no specific law. I mean, I have not seen any country which has adopted one particular law, specific law, to deal with nanosafety matters. Rather, they have these guidelines or policy plan, some soft law instruments. Asian countries, beside what they are doing, that they are trying to incorporate this GHS, OECD, GLP, GMP, and United Nations GHS. These provisions they try to incorporate in their laws. Now, implementation is again an issue because we frequently see some of the news in the reportings that these things are not properly followed. Then as I was telling, the most important or the most active role, which is played by ASEAN, because ASEAN has adopted 2 directives. One is cosmetic directive and another is medical device directive. Now, these 2 directives, and the whole purpose of adopting these 2 directives is to harmonize the requirements of cosmetics and medical devices. So these 10 countries, I mean, to some extent, this is, to some extent, I would say, very close to European practice, the countries. But the issue again here is the implementation, and issue again here is some of the countries which are, even though they are member of ASEAN, they are not equally economically strong and capable to implement these directives. And unfortunately, there is no reference. Initially, there was no reference of nanomaterials, but the cosmetic directive was recently updated, and the issue of nanomaterials was included. Now, the overall impact of chemical pollution at the global scale has not been confirmed scientifically yet, and scientific journal like Nature has already published this, that this is not yet the impact of chemical population globally, like the climate change effect or other sea rise. These things are scientifically proved, but this one is not proved. The chemical effect of chemical pollution is not confirmed yet. So we really do not know what will happen in Asia, because Asia is an agro-based continent. Feeds and pesticides are rampantly used for food production because of the huge pollution, and then huge population. Then also, the consumer protection and environmental protection internationally is a very recent idea. So it is not like other part of the world. However, the fact is the word nano is rampantly used, frequently used in product names, starting from candy to Tata Nano car to water filter. People love to use the word nano. So I have a feeling that gradually nano will be integrated, and without realizing the real challenges or the concern. Then there are issues of law of limitation. Even though consumer protection law, this has provision on the protection of the consumers, but you need to come up within 3 years, statutory provisions of 3 years. Then the burden of proof will be a serious issue, and burden of proof is on the consumers, and it is somehow impossible for the consumers. When the most scientists of most advanced research laboratories, they are not even sure how a consumer can. Then due to internet or e-commerce issue, now products are sold online, and private international law principles are also developing. So these are some of the very serious challenges. Here in this challenge, we have another international organization which is called ASEAN Forum, but it has a very limited authority. This is an exception, and its role, like, it's a network organization of the Asian Pacific. So it is not like, it's not a very strong, I would say, international organization which can play a leading role in nano safety matters. Science communication, it is a practice that scientists have a feeling that they understand everything very well. We respect them, but the scientific matters are not communicated properly. So Japan is an exception, because Japan did the public participation survey for a few years consecutively. And then, so what we see in terms of nano safety, these are all mostly technical in nature. Professor Endu started his lecture with precautionary principle, but I'm very sad to share here that ADB published a study where it says that Asian experience, even though most countries have adopted environmental and biodiversity law, the reference of precautionary principle is missing. So we do not have any product register. The product register, one of the purpose of this product register is that if in case in future there arise any adverse effect of engineered nanomaterials, so that you can use, you can help the company or persons liable, and there precautionary principle play an important role, but this is the case of Asia. So I'm almost very last slide of my presentation, but I see the overall situation progress in is very promising. I would like to take it as an opportunity. We are very fortunate that the EU-Asia dialogue on nanosafety has just started since 2017. It was in Iran, next year it was in Australia, then Thailand, again in Austria. However, the issue of concern here is that mostly scientific and technical topics are covered and not ethical, legal, and social impact of nanomaterials. These things are covered. As you can see from the report, it was published in 2017. The last red line, underline, the delegation was clear that this was something it could not comment on, and that the scientific landscape was in the heart of the interest of these dialogues. So the political will, I would like to say that Asia or nanomaterials in Asia, it has a huge prospect. We fully understand. We want that all these activities should go on, but keeping the nanosafety issues in mind. For that, political will, financial support, and multi-stakeholder involvement, focusing the ethical, legal, and social aspects of nanomaterials, it should play the key role for the ultimate success. So here I have written on this issue for these two, and whatever I have discussed, most of the things covered in these two papers I wrote 5-6 years ago, and I manage this Global X, Nanotechnology and International Law Guide run by the New York University. So I try to, time to time, I try to upload materials there. So this slide is basically a personal advertisement. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your patience. And I would love to answer if you have any question. Thank you so much.